My wife said she'd take care of the finances while I cared for my dying father. Then my dad's nurse asked, why'd she cancel his insurance? I looked her in the eyes and she said, we needed that money more. I stood up, pulled out my wallet, and said, not anymore. My name is Alan Maris, and if you'd asked me 2 years ago who I trusted the most in this world, I would have said my wife. Without hesitation. Corinne and I had been married 18 years. We weren't flashy, and we didn't need to be. We were that couple who hosted Thanksgiving even when no one RSVP'd. That couple with 3 half-finished home projects, 2 dogs, and a kitchen calendar filled with dentist appointments and birthdays scratched in pen. We weren't perfect, but we were solid. At least I thought we were. My dad, Henry Maris, had always been a quiet, hard-working man. He never spoke more than he needed to. He never expected much from anyone. When I told him we'd set up a room in our home for him after his diagnosis, he just nodded and said, don't make it too fancy. That was his way. He'd been diagnosed with glioblastoma, and the prognosis wasn't good. The doctor said 6 months if we were lucky, maybe less. He didn't want a hospice facility. Said he wanted to be around family. I agreed. It wasn't even a decision. I just did what a son should do. What I would have wanted if I were in his place. So I adjusted my life. I paused most of my woodworking contracts, laid off the 2 part-time helpers I had at the shop, and brought Dad into our home in Des Moines. We cleared out the guest room, bought a hospital bed, and installed rails in the bathroom. And Corinne? She told me, you take care of your dad. I'll take care of everything else. It was said so casually, but I remember the moment vividly. We were standing in the kitchen, and I was emptying the dishwasher. She had her phone in one hand, coffee in the other. Her hair was still wet from the shower, and she looked tired, but determined. I nodded. I remember thinking how lucky I was. Not every man has a wife who'd be okay with her father-in-law taking over half the house. Not every wife would be willing to manage the mortgage, utilities, taxes, insurance, all of it, while her husband changed adult diapers and spoon-fed Ensure shakes. I let myself believe things were under control. I let myself believe a lot of things. At first, the days blurred together. I was learning how to administer medications. I took courses online about late-stage brain cancer. I learned how to clean a feeding tube and how to coax my father back into bed when he thought he was still at the assembly line, trying to punch in for his shift. Some mornings, I'd find him crying quietly. He didn't know where he was. He didn't recognize the house. Some days, he thought I was his younger brother, Dale, who died in 1979. Other days, he was lucid. He'd look at me, and we'd talk about the Iowa Cubs, about Mom, about the workshop. And on those days, I felt like maybe, just maybe, we'd have more time than they'd given us. Corinne stayed out of the room most of the time. She said it was hard for her to see him like that. I didn't push her. I figured it was easier to divide and conquer. I handled the care, and she handled the life around it. Every few weeks, she'd say something like, I paid the Blue Cross premium this morning, or I renewed the car insurance, don't worry. She even made a spreadsheet once and showed it to me on her laptop, full of color-coded tabs. I didn't question her. I was too deep in the chaos to even think about opening another can of responsibility. But the signs started coming. First, it was a late fee on the water bill. Nothing major, but it showed up in the mail, and I left it on the table. Next, we downgraded our internet speeds. I figured maybe she was saving money. We weren't streaming much anyway. Then the electric company left a notice on the door. That one I couldn't ignore. I asked Corinne about it. She said she'd forgotten to hit submit on the payment, and those damn automated notices went out anyway. I believed her. Even when our Amazon account was suspended, I brushed it off. Even when our shared credit card declined at the pharmacy while I was buying ointment for Dad's sores, I just called the bank and paid with my business debit card. I didn't ask questions. I should have. It was Alma who finally told me. She was Dad's nurse. Not assigned. Exactly. She worked for an agency, but she came by almost every day, even on days she wasn't scheduled. Said she liked my dad. Said he reminded her of her own father. One afternoon, I was sitting in the backyard, trying to get a moment of quiet. Alma sat down next to me, sipping from a travel mug. She didn't look at me right away. Alan, she said gently, I called to verify coverage with his insurance today. You know, to get the hospice equipment approved. I nodded, waiting. They said the policy was canceled. My stomach turned. Canceled? I repeated. 6 weeks ago. Voluntary termination. They said the authorization came from Corinne. I must have looked confused, because she reached into her folder and pulled out a printed email. She handed it to me. The name at the bottom was my wife's. Did you know about this? Alma asked. I didn't answer. I couldn't. When I walked back inside, I found Corinne sitting on the couch, watching a show, her legs tucked underneath her, a blanket over her lap. She looked up and smiled. Hey, you okay? You look pale. I didn't say anything for a second. I was shaking. I felt my pulse in my throat. Did you cancel Dad's insurance? I finally asked. She looked up from the screen, blinked. Ah, yes. I meant to tell you. Why? I said. My voice cracked. We needed that money more, she said. Flat. like it was the most obvious thing in the world. I remember my hands twitching. I remember pulling out my wallet, digging for every last bill I had, throwing them on the coffee table. Not anymore, I said and walked out. I didn't sleep that night. Or the next. I sat in the guest room beside my father, who'd fallen into a quiet, barely breathing state. The kind they warn you about, the one before the final slip. And I thought, not just about the money, but about the betrayal. It wasn't the finances. It wasn't the canceled policy. It was the ease with which she did it. The indifference. Corinne and I had once taken vows. Through sickness and health. Through all of it. I thought she meant it. I thought we were stronger. Instead, while I sat beside a dying man, she was shopping online, going out for lunch, and letting everything fall apart behind my back. When Dad passed away, I held his hand. Alma sat across from me. She wept quietly. Corinne wasn't in the room. She never came to the funeral, and I haven't seen her since. The days after Dad's death moved slowly. Grief doesn't always come as a flood. Sometimes it comes in drips. A coffee mug you pour but don't drink. A coat you keep hanging by the door, even though the person who wore it isn't coming back. I barely spoke to Corinne. She stayed upstairs most of the time, like a stranger who had accidentally walked into the wrong house and didn't know how to leave. The funeral was small. Just a few neighbors, a couple of old co-workers from the auto parts plant where Dad had spent 30 years. Alma was there, standing in the back, hat in her hands, eyes down. I sat in the front row alone. I kept expecting Corinne to show up, to sit next to me, to hold my hand or say something, anything. But the seat stayed empty. The preacher read Psalm 23, and when the casket was lowered, I didn't cry. Not then. It wasn't until I got home and stepped into Dad's room, still as it was, bed neatly made, his slippers tucked just under the corner chair, that something in me broke. I sat on the edge of the bed and wept like a child. The next few days were mechanical. Calling the insurance company, confirming the final hospital charges. I contacted a probate attorney to get guidance on Dad's accounts, which were minimal. He'd lived modestly. A few thousand in savings. No outstanding debt. I called the hospice agency to ask about payment plans. They told me there had been no insurance reimbursement. Everything would need to be covered out of pocket. That's when I started digging. I pulled up our online banking accounts. The password had been changed. When I asked Corinne, she waved it off. I updated the login. I'll text it to you later, she said, not looking up from her phone. She never did. So I went to the bank, sat down with a representative, and explained the situation. With some ID and verification, I got access to everything. What I saw made my stomach turn. Our savings account, which had held over $60,000 at the beginning of the year, was down to $1,043.17. Our joint checking was overdrafted by $72. The overdraft protection had kicked in from a credit line I didn't even remember signing up for. The credit card? Nearly $15,000 in charges. I scrolled through the statements. It read like a lifestyle I didn't recognize. Boutique clothing, online subscriptions, meal kits, skincare brands I'd never heard of, spa services. 1 week. There were charges from a resort in Omaha. During a weekend, I remembered being home, elbow deep in adult diapers and crushed pills. I called her at work. She didn't pick up. I waited until she came home. She walked in like nothing had changed, put her purse down, asked what was for dinner. I didn't answer. I just handed her the printout. Pages of charges. She glanced at it and didn't even sit down. So what? That's what she said. Those exact words. So what? I stood there, heart racing. I could feel something deep in my chest unraveling. A knot that had been tied for months, maybe years. I asked you to help. I trusted you, I said. My voice cracked. I was helping, she said, defensive. You don't know what it was like, Alan. You were with your father all day. I was working full-time, handling all the bills, the stress. You canceled his insurance. Because we were drowning, she snapped. You think I liked doing that? We were about to lose the house. The mortgage, the taxes, the card payments. You left everything on me. And I couldn't do it all. You didn't tell me. I said, softer now. You could have just told me. She looked at me then, finally, and her eyes weren't angry anymore. They were tired. I didn't want to make it worse. It hit me like a punch in the gut. The twisted logic of someone who convinced herself that hiding the truth was a form of kindness. You let my father die thinking he was covered. You let me stand in front of him, telling him not to worry, while the bills piled up behind the scenes. You lied to both of us. Silence. Then, barely above a whisper, she said, I didn't know how to fix it. That night, she slept in the guest room. I slept on the couch. And in the morning, I packed a duffel bag and drove to my brother's place across town. We hadn't spoken much in years, but when he saw me at the door, he just said, yeah, come in. I spent a week there, just thinking, processing. I didn't even tell Corinne where I went. She texted once. Just, are you okay? I didn't answer. I needed space. I needed to breathe in a house that didn't feel like betrayal. I met with a financial advisor. Explained everything. He told me, kindly but firmly, that it would take years to dig out of the hole. I wasn't surprised. I had already started selling some of my shop equipment. A few high-end sanders, a planer I'd had since I was 23. I hated doing it, but I had no choice. The advisor asked me if I wanted to involve law enforcement, if I believed this constituted a financial crisis. But I couldn't. Not yet. What hurt more than the money was the silence. The way she let everything crumble without a word. The way she could stand beside me every day while I broke myself to take care of my father and never once say, "Alan, I need help." One night, back at my brother's, I sat outside on the porch. The sun was setting behind the trees, and the sound of cicadas filled the air. I thought about the first time Corinne and I walked through our house in Des Moines. She had seen the fireplace and smiled. Said it reminded her of her grandmother's place in Cedar Rapids. I thought about how she used to leave notes in my lunch bag. How we'd once fought over what to name our second dog and made up with ice cream at midnight. We'd been a team. Now we were strangers. I didn't know what to do. I didn't know what came next. But I knew I couldn't go back. Not yet. I returned to the house a week later, not because I was ready, but because I had to. There were still papers to sort, debts to face, and a home that belonged to both of us. At least on paper. When I walked through the front door, the first thing I noticed was that the air felt stale. The second thing was that Corinne wasn't there. Her car was gone. The house was quiet. There was a folded note on the kitchen table. It was short. "I'm staying with Trina for a while. You need space. So do I." There was no apology. No emotion. Just logistics. Like she was informing me the plumber would be by at noon. I stood in the kitchen for a long time, staring at the note, the fruit bowl beside it filled with apples no one had eaten, the sink with a single coffee mug still streaked with lipstick. I walked to the guest room where Dad had spent his final months. The bed was stripped bare. I opened the closet and found one of his jackets still hanging, the one I used to drape over him when he got cold at night. I sat on the bed and leaned forward, elbows on knees, and tried to think. I didn't feel anger, not in that moment. Not exactly. What I felt was empty, like a balloon slowly losing air. It wasn't just that the person I loved had made terrible choices. It was that I had missed the signs for so long, that I had trusted so completely while everything rotted underneath. Over the next few days, I moved methodically. I canceled our joint credit card and opened one in my own name. I closed the savings account. I called the mortgage company to explain the situation and try to refinance. They weren't sympathetic, but they listened. Barely. Then I met with a divorce lawyer. It was a quiet meeting. No dramatic gestures. Just the slow, heavy realization of what needed to happen. I told her everything. About the canceled insurance, the money, the lies. She nodded, took notes, and asked a few questions. Did she ever admit to taking money without your consent? She said we needed it more. The lawyer sighed. That's not a legal defense. But intent is hard to prove in cases like this, especially with shared accounts. Still, we'll protect your remaining assets. You're not liable for what she continues to do from here on. I nodded, though I didn't really feel anything. It all felt like reading a book about someone else's life. Corinne reached out 3 days later. It was a Saturday morning. I was sanding down an old rocking chair on the back porch. My hands were finally steady enough again to work, even if only for short periods. Her name popped up on my phone. I stared at it for a few seconds before answering. "I just wanted to talk," she said, voice low. I didn't respond. "I'm not asking for anything," she continued. I didn't know how bad it had gotten. And by the time I did, it was already too far gone. I panicked. I could hear cars in the background, muffled voices. Maybe she was at a coffee shop. Maybe she was just pacing on a sidewalk, unsure where she belonged now. I leaned back in the chair, with dust on my jeans. "You could have told me," I said. "That's what partners do. They tell each other when things are falling apart." "I didn't want to be the one who broke everything," she said. "You were," I said, not harsh, just honest. "The second you lied, you already were." She was quiet for a long time. "Do you hate me?" she asked. I took a breath. That was the kind of question people ask when they already know the answer, but need to hear it out loud. "No," I said. "But I don't trust you. And I don't know if I ever will again." She sniffled. Maybe she was crying. Maybe not. "Okay," she whispered. "I'll stay out of the house for now. Just let me know what I need to sign." I hung up. The weeks that followed were a strange limbo. Life moved on, but I didn't. Not fully. Every corner of the house held memories of a life that now felt like a half-truth. I found an envelope of old photos tucked in the back of a drawer. Corinne and I in our 20s, smiling on a beach in Galveston. Her holding one of our dogs in a Christmas sweater. Me, arms coated in sawdust, proudly holding the first piece I ever sold. We had real moments. Real joy. That was what made everything harder. It would have been easier if I'd never loved her. I started going for walks every evening. Long ones. Miles at a time. I walked through the neighborhoods near Gray's Lake, past houses where families were eating dinner, watching TV, arguing about curfews. Sometimes I imagined slipping into one of those houses, just sitting down, pretending to be part of a life where things made sense. But I always came home. One afternoon, Alma called. She hadn't been there since the funeral. I figured she had moved on to another client. "Hey, Alan." she said, her voice warm. I've got something I think belongs to you. She stopped by later that day, brought a small canvas bag. Your dad had this tucked in his nightstand drawer. I didn't want it getting lost in the chaos. Inside the bag was an old wooden box. I opened it carefully. Inside was a watch. Dad's watch. The one he wore every day until the tremors made it too hard to fasten. I hadn't even noticed it was missing. There was also a letter. Folded, yellowed. My name on the front in his handwriting. I didn't open it right away. I waited until that night. I sat at the kitchen table, the same one where Corinne had left her note, and unfolded the letter with shaking hands. Alan, you've always been steady. Even as a boy, you were the one everyone leaned on. That's a heavy thing to carry. I don't know what the world will look like for you after I'm gone, but I hope you remember one thing. You did right by me. Always. Don't let anyone make you question that. Be kind, even when it's hard. And don't let the world take your heart just because it bruised you. Love you, son. Dad. I folded it back up and pressed it to my chest. And for the first time since everything fell apart, I let myself feel something other than hurt. After I read Dad's letter, I stayed up half the night. Not crying, not pacing, just sitting, thinking. It didn't change what Corinne had done, but it gave me something she had taken away, clarity. I hadn't failed him. I hadn't failed myself. She had. She'd made her choices, and she'd live with them. The next morning, I did something I hadn't done in months. I opened my laptop and wrote a new listing for my business. I posted updated photos of my shop, started emailing old clients, and called up one of my part-time helpers to see if he was available again. I thought you shut it down, he said. Not anymore, I told him. Work gave me back a little piece of myself. Every cut of wood, every sanded edge, it reminded me that I could still build something, even after everything had fallen apart. Then I started documenting the financial trail Corinne left behind. I didn't go after her through criminal charges. That would have taken years, and I didn't want to waste more energy there. But I wasn't going to let her walk away unscathed. I had access to every purchase she'd made using our shared card. Every expense. I built a case. Not for court, but for leverage. When our divorce mediation date came, she walked in with a calm, guarded face. Her lawyer looked polished. She wore a navy blouse I recognized from one of her boutique purchases. My lawyer and I walked in with a file 2 inches thick. Expenses, statements, dates, canceled policies. Her digital signature on the termination of Dad's insurance. The mediator glanced at her, then back at the stack. You sure you want to do this formally? He asked her. Corinne looked at me. For the first time in a long time, I saw something crack behind her eyes. She knew what I had. The meeting was brief after that. We settled out of court. I got the house. I got the business. She waived spousal support. I insisted on no alimony, either direction. I didn't want a cent from her. I just wanted her gone. We split the debt, 50-50 on paper, but I sold off some unused tools and cleared my portion within 6 months. She moved back in with her sister. I heard through the grapevine she got a job at a dental office. Nothing wrong with that. But it wasn't the world she'd tried to buy with our savings. She sent me a letter once. Months after everything was finalized. She apologized. Genuinely, I think. Said she'd been lonely, overwhelmed, that she thought taking control of the finances would make her feel less powerless. But instead, it made her a liar. A thief. A coward. She ended the letter with, I hope one day you'll forgive me. I never replied. Not because I hate her, but because that part of my life is over. It took time, but I rebuilt. The shop thrived again. I took smaller jobs at first, then bigger ones. Got back into custom furniture, wedding gifts, even a contract with a local boutique hotel to design their reception desk. That one paid well. More importantly, I started living again. I took a trip to Red Rock Lake that fall. Just me, the dogs, and a borrowed canoe. I paddled out early one morning, the mist hanging low, and felt, for the first time in what felt like years, peace. Real peace. Not the kind you pretend to have. The kind you earn. And revenge? It wasn't in the courtroom. It was in watching her realize she lost everything that mattered. Not because I took it from her, but because she gave it up. It was in knowing that she had to sit with the knowledge that I had done right by my father, while she sat on the sidelines, pretending to be overwhelmed when really, she was just absent. The best revenge was not in punishing her. It was in becoming someone I respected again. I still keep Dad's letter in my nightstand drawer. And the watch? I wear it on Sundays. It doesn't keep perfect time anymore, but that's okay. Neither do I. But I move forward, step by step. Not bitter, just better.